Welcome back to the Adrenal Fatigue podcast. It's Angela here, and I'm with my amazing partner, Danielle Zies.
Hi, everybody.
All right, well, today we want to discuss common and oftentimes hidden illnesses that can cause and or often accompany adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction. It's not always clear whether HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal fatigue is the chicken or the egg in the situation. For example, did the Epstein-Barr virus or mono that you had as a kid create so much stress on the body that it hindered your HPA axis? Or was it your HPA axis already compromised due to chronic stress from, say, childhood trauma or another health issue? The answers aren't always straightforward. So today we want to discuss a handful of illnesses or health issues in hopes to start connecting some dots for you and bringing awarenesses to things that you need to consider or look into with an integrative practitioner so you can finally take steps towards recovery and recover once and for all.
This is going to be a really great conversation. And one question that comes up a lot in our community is, what if it's not adrenal fatigue that I'm battling? Like, can you still help me if I don't have adrenal fatigue? And oftentimes the issue isn't rooted in adrenal fatigue. And as you're going to see today, there are so many different issues that ad- the adrenals get pulled into because they are our resilience glands and they help us mediate stress, right? So we're really hoping today to shed some light and bring some clarity as to how this all connects and to how all these different health situations or health issues implicate the adrenals and give you some great insights on how to address it in a really holistic way, right at the root.
Yeah, I think you're going to see some common themes as we move through these today.
For sure.
Okay, should we dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is mold.
Ugh, I just hate the word. I truly hate the word. I
Makes you
feel,
cringe.
yeah. And I feel like if you start going down the mold rabbit hole, it can feel very intimidating and very overwhelming. But being exposed to mold is very common. And depending where you live too, it will be a lot more common than maybe some of the drier climates. But it's one of those things, if you are having health issues or you're sensitive already, when you're already sensitive, this is
Mm-hmm.
when those mycotoxins that are made from mold really can start hindering your health in a much more notable way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and causing that chronic inflammation and really affecting the immune system. And
Yeah.
that's going to disrupt the normal functioning of the HPA axis. So, um, this was actually part of my story. I live on the central coast of California, and so it's very um, wet here, very moist, and we have a lot of mold. And moving here, that was a big issue for me. And I know it was a part of one of the contributing factors to my health issues. And so, yeah, this is a bit near and dear to my heart, this conversation, because I think it's really important. And sometimes it's less obvious, right? Like we don't, for me, it was actually very obvious that, mold was pretty much a part of my everyday life. And I had to be really good about taking care of the mold in my physical environment. But for some of us, it might not be something that we can actually see, and so it's something that it can be kind of sneaky, and you need to be careful about. So if you feel like that might be something that's going on for you, or maybe something that you've dealt with in the past that could be contributing to this, definitely something you want to consider and address.
Definitely. We all kind of get used to seeing that mold in our shower kind of creep in every now and then. Like that's a little bit more common. And I don't think that that is necessarily like the main contributor. We don't like seeing that in our bathrooms, but it's more of this like sneaky mold that's below the surfaces that can really cause problems because we're not aware of it. So if you've had leaks, if you've had water damage, right? If you live in these humid climates where, like when I was living in Korea, you could just like see it behind the walls, like with the moisture, it just in the environment. So it's just something to be mindful of. And if you are really struggling and you think that mold could be an issue, like getting professionals to come and kind of check things out so you know what you're working with. I think having that awareness, especially if you're struggling in a really like chronic way without answers, it's really worth looking into. You hit the nail on the
Absolutely.
head though, Angela. You mentioned the chronic inflammation and the ongoing chronic immune activation. And the immune system is going to call on that stress, that whole HPA axis, because it's a stress on the body, right? And we need things to put out this fire and deal with
Yeah.
this chronic exposure to these mycotoxins, right? So It can feel overwhelming. Luckily, on our team here at the Adrenal Recovery Collective, we have practitioners who are really well versed in dealing and seeking out if mycotoxins or mold could be an issue for you, and then helping you deal with that from a health perspective. And we did do a podcast all about mold with MJ Renshaw. We will link it in the show notes. But she went into use some of the products she used for cleaning mold and a bit of her mold story, which could be really helpful. So if you want to know more about mold, definitely check out that episode.
Hmm. Yeah, and it can bring up a variety of symptoms for people, right? When you have mold exposure. For me, it was the way it manifested in my body was with breathing and shortness of breath. And for some people, it can be that. It can also be fatigue. It can cause anxiety, cognitive impairment, depression. So there's many different symptoms that can result from this. Um,
It's like stress
so.
in general, right? It's like such a
Mhm,
blanket of symptoms, and it affects everybody in different ways depending on what we're susceptible to.
mhm.
And sometimes those symptoms are so common that we come to think of them as normal.
So mold exposure can lead to the production of inflammatory mediators such as histamines, which can further disrupt the HPA axis and contribute to the development of symptoms. And I think this is just really important to remember. Again, that's just going to cause histamines is going to um, create an immune response, right?
Yeah.
That's
So,
going to require stress hormones.
yeah, exactly. And so when we hear the word histamine, a lot of us think of like antihistamines, which we take when we're having allergic reactions, right? So histamine essentially is a chemical mediator that's released by our immune system in response to inflammation or an allergy. Histamine plays a crucial role in the body's response to stress by triggering the release of stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline from the adrenal glands. So that's familiar if you've ever had an allergic reaction. And what do they give you when you're having an anaphylactic shock? An EpiPen, which is like epinephrine, which is one of the hormones secreted during your body's stress response. But this is just in a higher dose, right? To save your life. So you can see
Mhm.
how it all connects.
Yeah,
So
it's
when the body is
fast.
under chronic stress, the release of histamine and cortisol can become imbalanced. And this ties in so many ways. I think this is why we put this one right here at the beginning, because with histamine, it ties in because in the adrenal fatigue community, a lot of us have these leaky gut situations or situations where we're reacting more to foods and having immune responses every single time we eat. So,
Mhm.
what we really want to show you is that the histamine reaction relates to cortisol. And so, when you're having these chronic immune responses, then yeah, your stress hormones are going to be responding as well. And it's really hard to recover from burnout or recover from HPA axis dysfunction if you're always having this immune response with every meal or with something in your environment.
Yeah,
Pretty
and
interesting.
it is. And it's like I think for me that was when so many of the pieces started to connect for me when I realized, okay, I was also having a lot of food allergies. I think many of people that come to us are dealing with as well, and just real a lot of sensitivities to the environment, right? So environmental allergies, allergies to foods, and that's when you really start to see like there's definitely something going on, right? With a buildup of histamine, with the immune system, and like you're saying, that's obviously going to impact the hormones and the overproduction of stress hormones. So.
One other thing I wanted to mention about histamine was the topic of histamine intolerance, because this comes up all the time. But essentially, this is when your body has difficulty breaking histamine down, and this leads to an overproduction or an overaccumulation of histamine in the body. And this overproduction of histamine can cause or lead to the overproduction of stress hormones. So, again, you're seeing that correlation between the histamine buildup and the stress hormones.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, kind of talking about food allergies and food intolerances and things like that, should we jump into a little bit more of the gut infections and things like IBS, which many people suffer from?
Huge topic. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Again, with these gut infections, this is like your specialty, Danielle. But yeah, one thing is that, this is all about, this can contribute to HPA axis dysfunction through, again, the activation of the immune system. Think about it. Every time you eat, all we do all day long, we have to eat, right? We have to eat 3 times a day at least to survive, which means every time you're eating, if your gut is compromised in any fashion, then or you don't have proper enzymes to break down your food, right? You're going to be stressing out the body every single time you eat. And I don't know about you, but that's what thing was so stressful for me when I was going through this, was that I was thinking that these foods that I was eating I was allergic to, but what was really going on, right, is more of the health of the gut, and so it didn't matter what I ate. So I was at the point where I was taking everything out of my diet, and I think a lot of people can relate out there. Whereas like all of a sudden I was just eating like vegetables for months, and that was hard on my body, and just emotionally, mentally, it was exhausting.
Yeah. And that's a sign, that's a true sign that like something's going on in the gut if your diet has become that limited and you can't break that limitation. I think that's a
Mhm.
huge red flag. And a lot of us come to see it as like, oh, this is just normal and like this is all I can eat, right? And I was right there with you. This is part of my story in a really big way, in which actually led me to learning more about nutrition,
Mhm.
was because I was so limited with my diet. And if I slipped up, I really, really paid the price. And
Yeah.
it's really, I want to give you all hope and inspiration, because looking back, I was that girl who had a limited diet and would really react to certain foods. But now I have so much more food freedom. And it's because I've done this work to heal and seal my gut lining and really address what was going on at a root level digestively.
Yeah. And that's
But
what's so wonderful about our program too, is that that's like, as our nutritionist and gut expert, like your focus is not to help people continue to limit their diet, right? Continue to take out foods. It's like, let's get to the root of the issue, which is most often, something going on in the gut.
exactly. Yeah. I think it's so important. So just keeping in mind that when you're eating foods and you're reacting to them day in, day out, or you have an underlying gut infection, we didn't really touch on the infections, but if you do have an underlying gut infection, which I will add is a lot more common than you might think. So it's
Mhm.
great if you're struggling digestively, just to get clarity as to what's going on. But in any sense, whether it's infection or food sensitivities, you want to deal with the chronic inflammation and the chronic immune system and the chronic immune activation that's going to be happening day in and day out, to address these things that are going on, because that's another burden to the HPA axis, right? And so it can keep you stuck.
Yeah.
So a
For
lot of
sure.
people ask us that question, is it my gut issues? Is this my adrenals? And at the end of the day, it's truly both. One other point that would be great to touch on is the gut brain axis. And so the brain and the gut is so intricately connected. That's why we call the gut our second brain, right? And so there's a complex network of neural, hormonal, and immune pathways between your brain and your gut. So when there's some issues happening in the gut, it can disrupt the communication and lead to further HPA issues. Just interesting
Yeah.
to take into account. And this is why when you're having a lot of gut issues, you'll notice that your anxiety starts to become more rampant as well. Your mood becomes a little less stable. When the pendulum starts swinging in the other direction, you start cleaning up your diet and your gut starts getting more healthy. You'll notice that it affects your the way that you think and the way that you sleep and your mood in such a big way. And that's just because of this gut brain axis.
Mhm.
And then, of course, we can't leave out the microbiome. Healthy gut microbiome is truly essential. And when it is disrupted, it's going to disrupt a lot of things when it comes to digestion, when comes to the gut brain axis. And when it's disrupted, it's going to lead to further HPA axis dysfunction as well. So you can see again how it all connects.
Yeah. We're seeing this theme a lot of the immune system, right? And so I think it's important just to add here, and maybe this is kind of in closing, is that 70% they say of the immune system lies in the gut. So there you go. Like the
Yeah.
importance of a healthy gut is key. And there are so many of us out there, and it's just unfortunate, but just the way that we eat, what we eat, the fact that our food doesn't have all the nutrients and minerals that it's meant to have anymore, and the fact that we're eating less um, foods from the earth and more processed food, it's no doubt that that is going to be compromised over time. Not to mention the impact that stress, right, emotional and stress, mental stress has on on the body and the gut, right? There's just so much going on there, and it's just so important. So I feel like anybody out there that's listening, anybody probably that's breathing right now, could use some love for their gut. I really do, because so much of our gut is impacted by just through stress alone. And I'm talking about the physical, mental, and emotional stresses we just talked about. But anyway.
Yeah. And I say it all the time. I think we get used to living at a baseline, the baseline of how we feel day to day. And it's not until you start doing that work and digesting your food better and healing and sealing that lining of your GI that you can actually step into a new baseline that feels so much better. But oftentimes we don't even know this is available to us. So this is
True.
why we love the Fatigue to Fabulous program, because we're addressing all of these things in a way that's really cohesive. And what you'll find is because there's so many different issues, it's easy to go down the wormhole of like, oh, I have to address this, I have to address that. And it can get overwhelming really quick. But sometimes it's just like taking a step back and doing the work on your foundations and the foundations of health, which we're really big on here at the Adrenal Recovery Collective, because when things start improving in that way and you start building up your resilience and your nutrition and you're just correcting things in your lifestyle, then a lot of the symptoms start to ease up and things start moving in the right direction. And if you need to get more specific, that's when the practitioners come in and give you that clarity on how to address it. So you don't have to feel that overwhelm, that fear, that anxiety, and that confusion around like, okay, where do I start with all these different conditions? I feel like I have them all.
Hmm.
Because I
Yeah.
know there's people out there, especially if you've been struggling for a while, that you're going to feel like you have all of these things. And maybe you do to some
And
degree,
maybe you
but it's like, where
do.
do we
Right.
start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what the practitioners are so amazing at. And yeah, I think it's just, for those of you who are new to us, I think it's important just to share that, Danielle and I, as you probably have gathered from what we've shared, is that we are both survivors. And really, we've created this whole collective and this podcast and our program because this is what we wished we had when we were going through it. And so we have really feel like we have brought together like the top-notch practitioners that we know of in the world, as well as just bringing together a very holistic protocol and approach to recovery. And so anyway, we're just excited to share with you, and we hope this information has been helpful so far. Um, and I think should we keep going? We
Yeah.
have a
And I
few
kind of
more.
just want to preface right now, maybe a little late, but Angela and myself, we're not necessarily experts in mold or experts in fibromyalgia or these topics that we're talking about today. But this is what our doctors are really great at. Our integrative practitioners really are experts in dealing with these more complex things. We are experts in the HPA axis and helping you mediate and navigate this stress response that's going to be going on in the background or not in the background in a really big way in the forefront whenever you're dealing with any of these conditions and more.
Okay, so the next one, we see a lot people that come into our community, and that is fibromyalgia. And for those who don't know, it's a chronic pain condition, and it is often associated with adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction. And the HPA axis can become dysregulated, and again, it's leading to that overproduction of the stress hormones like cortisol.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
oh,
with pain, I think inflammation, right? And so you're going to
mhm,
have that inflammatory response. You're going to be having a physical stress response because you're in pain. The
mhm,
interesting thing about fibromyalgia, too, is it's actually connected to diagnoses of chronic fatigue syndrome.
mhm. Yeah, and again, we're going to come back to that overactive immune system. So that common theme, um, and going to cause a lot of symptoms. And we know like how much that pain, just having pain in your body and chronic pain, right? That's going to just lead to so many other secondary issues, right? Because you're dealing with like, yeah, when you have chronic pain, you probably don't sleep well, right? When you don't get good sleep, then what happens, right? So it's just like, it can really, this inflammation that we're talking about, and this um, overactive immune system is going to cause, um, so many other things down the road. And of course, as you can probably guess, again, creating more stress in the body and putting more toll on the adrenals and making them having to work harder.
You can see how it perpetuates.
Hmm. Yeah.
And people might not like me for saying this, but I think when I hear fibromyalgia and when I hear chronic fatigue syndrome, kind of sets up some red flags for me
Hmm.
that something's not been addressed. Because I think that it's easy to get these diagnoses and accept them that they are what they are, but
Hmm.
without understanding why they're there. And then when we accept them
Exactly.
as they are, that this is just how it is, then it's easy that we're just going to live with them and not look for
Right.
that route. And I truly see this so often, Angela. I know you do too. And it can be frustrating because it becomes part of your identity and it can be one of those reasons why we don't ever get better.
Yep.
And so I don't
Diagnosis
want
is.
to shame anybody, if you've kind of like fallen into that, because that's just the way our medical system is unfortunately set up, because there's not a lot of information as to what's causing chronic fatigue
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
fibromyalgia. Like IBS, I tend to think it's a bit of a blanket diagnosis. What do you
Hmm.
think, Angela?
Yeah, I was gonna say like yeah, like an empty or like a default. And so yeah, I totally agree with you. And I feel like it's, there's a lot of other issues going on that we're just not digging deep enough.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how our medical system is set up for the most part. So it's not surprising really. Um,
I think
but
that
yeah,
will
but
ruffle
we
some feathers. I truly do,
sure, it's an
because
unpopular opinion, and that's okay too. But just know that we have people that come with us with fibromyalgia and a diagnosis of fibromyalgia for years, decades, and then they start addressing the issues, and guess what? Their pain,
off all their meds,
yeah,
off all their meds from the,
all their meds and
yeah.
sleeping better, and life is totally changed. Um, so
Find
yeah,
good practitioners at the end of the day,
that's
whether
right.
it's with
Right.
us or somebody else, but you really want to get to the root of what's causing that chronic fatigue or that fibromyalgia.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm a broken record every time, but it's like integrative functional medicine is um I'm just so grateful to be living in a time where this is becoming more mainstream and that people are seeking out this kind of support, because there's so many of us who are sitting here day after day, with these diagnoses, with the pain and the suffering, and we don't have to be, we really don't have to be living in this. Um, and even if we don't get rid of our diagnosis completely, or there's often a way easier way of life with less symptoms and a better quality of life.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. We could keep going, but okay, so let's dive into Epstein-Barr virus, um, and talk about this. This is a type of herpes virus, and it's known to cause infections such as mono, and is associated, often connected. We see a huge link with this and HPA axis dysfunction. Um, Again, it's going to cause chronic inflammation. We're going to bring in those themes of chronic inflammation, and it can cause immune system activation or overactivation, I would say. And again, that overproduction of stress hormones.
So there you go. And
Here
this
we
is
are
another
again.
one very closely linked to chronic fatigue syndrome. A lot of the
Absolutely.
times, and we've seen this time and time again at the Adrenal Recovery Collective, is when these people come with like decades of fatigue and
Hmm.
not a lot of answers, I should say. When they start to dig into more testing, it's finding these underlying viral infections that have been rearing their ugly heads, contributing to
Ugh,
this inflammation, this chronic immune activation, and chronic stress response. And it tires the body out. After 20 years, that's a lot.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive into talking about the thyroid and the HPT axis.
Yeah. I mean, we're always breaking it to like adrenal, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, hypothalamic pituitary, the gut, but the whole body is intricately connected, right? And so
Yeah,
it's all connecting to each other. So
right.
when we say HPT, hypothalamic pituitary thyroid, it is also connected to the adrenals. And this is what we see is oftentimes you're not experiencing thyroid issues without some sort of adrenal dysregulation.
Hmm.
When we think of the thyroid, right, this is our body's metabolic control center. And when it's not functioning properly or when these hormones are not getting converted effectively, it's going to lead to some sort of stress that then the adrenals are kicking into gear to try to bring the body back into this nice balance. So we see it all the time. It's like if you're struggling with your thyroid, then you want to make sure that you're doing the foundations. When we say foundations, again, this is what we teach. These foundations, we come at you really hard with them in Fatigue to Fabulous, because this is what's going to bring both of these glands, the thyroid and the adrenals, back into a nice harmony. And if you need additional support, again, from practitioners to kind of get specific, then you of course you can always do that. But the foundations are always going to be on your side with these types of issues.
So we have a couple more to share. And so far, all these conditions or illnesses we've been talking about have been stress and trauma, sort of on a more of a chemical or physical level. And now we want to bring in this different type of stress or different type of trauma into the conversation, and want to talk about emotional trauma now, because it's a very important part of the puzzle. Okay, so when we're talking about emotional trauma, I first want to make a distinction between capital T trauma and lowercase t trauma. Because we're talking about different levels, I would say. And so capital T trauma are often known as things like natural disasters, going through war, different diseases. We're talking about physical or sexual harm, witnessing death, witnessing abuse, experiencing neglect, and sudden loss of a loved one. And then lowercase t trauma would be more non-life-threatening injuries, emotional abuse, the death of a pet, maybe bullying or harassment, or loss of significant relationships. So all of us have experienced, I'm pretty sure, emotional trauma of some kind, and unfortunately, some of us more than others, right? And maybe having both capital T and lowercase t trauma. So we have different capacities. We all have different capacities on how we handle, how we cope, and how we process trauma, and or say our resiliency, which is really a whole nother conversation, right? So much of that is, how we saw it, people in our lives react, to stress, and the people in our formative years often, how they reacted to stress, how they reacted to life. And there's obviously lots of other factors involved there. But yeah, so and how this emotional trauma relates to your physical health and adrenal fatigue or HPA axis is really important.
Well, before you go on, Angela, when you say like little t trauma, and I'm just thinking like there's really no, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there really like no limit to what could be considered emotional trauma? Especially I think of like when we're little kids and some of the work I've done with coaches, it's like these moments of like childhood that come up where somebody said something to you, but it was like a profound moment in your life where you started perceiving or creating limiting beliefs or certain beliefs about yourself based on this moment because you were so little and impressionable. I mean, it could happen
Yeah.
when you're a kid, could happen when you're a grown adult. But I'm just thinking like we don't always think of certain conversations or events as traumas, but could they actually be a trauma in a matter of speaking?
Yeah, I think that's such a good important point to make, because sometimes that word trauma even can be like triggering for some people, and they think, well, no, I didn't have trauma, or it can even just feel really big. But I feel like it's anything that um, I like what you said about it's something that like disturbs, your normal experience. Right? Like it takes you away from, I can remember some really intense points in my life where somebody said something in a way or made fun of me. And it was like that moment, right? It was almost like a light switch, right? Where it was like I started thinking about myself differently. I started, like it just changes the way that you see the world or yourself. And anything that's going to disrupt that, right, is a trauma. Um, so um, I mean, we could go into this deeper, but I think that hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think that we have to remember that oftentimes we say like, oh, well, that wasn't that big of a deal, right? Or um, this is like the least, I don't want to open up a big can of worms here, but I do want to say this because this is like one of my pet peeves that I actually have heard myself say. So I've had to eat my own words from what I've shared in the past, but saying that kids are resilient. And I often think that that is a really easy thing to say. It's often discarding or dismissing like the things that our children go through every day that can seriously impact their lives for the long term. And it's unfortunate, right? Because we think, oh, kids are resilient, but really what's happening is that's not going away, right? The next day might happen and things like, oh, they might feel like, oh, they got through that, or they're fine, or yeah, they're resilient, they'll get through it. But really they are taking that in, right? And they're formulating their own conclusions and changing the way that they perceive the world or act in the world. And so I think it's important for us to realize that, like I can think of things in my life where, I probably should have had, therapy at a young age for, and yet I didn't. And I'm sure that part of the conversation that was happening in my household or maybe households, friends, and was that, oh, your kids are resilient. They'll figure it out. And I
Yeah.
just don't believe that that's the case. I think we're all taking it in and we're all bringing it into our tissues, as Denise Labar would say in her book, The Issues Are in the Tissues. And we're actually, that's affecting our body on not only our emotionally and mentally, but also physically. So, um, like any trauma we've talked about today, when you experience that trauma, right, your stress glands, your adrenals, um, and the entire HPA axis is impacted, and it makes us more sensitive, and again, resulting in that high cortisol exposure and higher cortisol burden following those stressful episodes. And we have to remember that when we have trauma, it's not just having the trauma in the moment, right? When the trauma is over, right? Most of us like I said before, we're taking that with us, or we're replaying the trauma in our minds um, often day after day, all day long, right? In some situations. So we're not only, trying to repair and heal from that trauma that we had, whether it was a one-time event, whether it was repeated abuse, we're not only trying to get through that, but we're also the reliving of it, right? Or the impact of it. Therefore, it's also creating stress, chronic stress, ongoing stress. So
Yeah.
again, we're talking about, imbalance of hormones. We're talking about a huge, correlation or connection to the nervous system, right? And dysregulation. Um, and that really creates a ripple effect in our body. Just to kind of put a complex idea simply is that, you know, when we are stressed, when we have trauma, right? It's in our bodies, and it's affecting the way that our bodies are functioning. When we think about when we're stressed, right? We often um, clench, right? We freeze up, we hold, everything's very constricted. And our body's going to work as easily, right? You think of it as like a plant trying to grow and it's not being watered, and it starts to like shrivel up and the leaves get shrivelly. That's kind of the idea of what I think about. It's like that's what's happening. And yes, we are resilient, but if we are having this stress and not having the right support or resources, or maybe we're thinking, and so I'm thinking of like big capital T traumas, or even just lowercase t traumas, or maybe just the stress of a job, right? If we're going through that chronically, but yet we're not getting support, we're not having self-care, we're not taking time for joy or for play, right, to recover, then it's going to take a toll on our bodies. I think again, I'm throwing a lot into this conversation. Like this could be like 3 or 4 episodes in itself, but I think it's important to remember that, in our culture, we're we're not always getting the support that we need, and we're moving through things fast. Like a lot of times when our clients come to us and they're working with us one-on-one in particular, working with me, I see a lot of just, moving through, deaths of loved ones, and parents, and having a trauma that they've never really processed, that we end up working through. And, you know, it's just, it's so interesting in our culture, the way that we choose, a lot of us tend to work through death.
Really. I mean, somebody once told me, I think it was a member of our Fatigue to Fabulous program who was a grief therapist of some sort, but that
Hmm.
like grieving is like a practice. Like it is like we should do a podcast on grief because it's just
Yeah.
like such a doozy. But trauma in general, Angela, like I love what you're saying and feel like this topic is huge and it can be really heavy. And when you're saying all this stuff, like I'm thinking of the lifestyle that can follow, what we're processing, right? And so many people who have had trauma in any form, right? Gabor Mate says it. Not everybody who has had trauma is an addict, but everybody who is an addict has trauma. So the mindset, right? The anxiety, the depression, the things that lead us to addictions, which is a
Mm-hmm.
whole other topic as well. But, getting caught in this kind of situation from trauma, rooted in trauma, I should say, like that lifestyle is going to lead to things that are causing more, not just the addiction, but like the mental space that you're in and day out is going to be leading to more chronic inflammation. It's going to be leading to more chronic immune activation, just because of the way that we'll probably tend to live, right? Our food choices, our sleep patterns, like the just dysregulation to like those healthy, solid foundations in life, because they become so difficult. Like we all, maybe you've been that person, or somebody who's been really in the depths of depression, who knows that they should go have a nourishing meal or knows they should get out in the sun, but can't even get themselves out of bed in the morning. Right. And so it's, it's hard because that cycle can so easily perpetuate, and it
Yeah,
can be so hard to find the motivation when you're really in the depths of it to break it.
right. I know. And I think it's something that, yeah, either we don't have the resources or we, yeah, some people, it's a tough one. And, I mean, even just thinking about what you were saying about the grief, I can't tell you how many, and I find myself doing this all the time, is when I'm crying, I like apologize. And I have clients doing this all the time. I'm sorry, and trying to stop the tears. And I think that alone just is a is a reminder for me that in our culture, it is like frowned upon to to grieve and to cry. And I love it. One time, one yoga teacher said to me once, that tears are like the healing, I don't know what she said with exact words, but like your tears are like, sorry, I'm gonna get it in just a second. That tears are like the healing juice for the heart, like
Oh, I
your
love
heart.
that.
Yeah, it's like your heart like needs to cry and needs to feel. And so many of us, it's hard to feel, right? Because it's so intense. And I want to like let you know, I want to share something about myself just so that you understand, like, I totally get it. I think we all get it, right? But I mean, if you don't know, and if you're newer to us, that one of the biggest traumas in my life is losing my daughter at birth. And, you know, that is one of the most challenging things I'll probably hopefully ever have to go through. And it's and it hurts, but the more that I grieve and the more that I allow myself to be present with what is going on and the feelings and the emotions and the sensations that I'm having, the more that after I get through that initial hard piece, it's actually like really, really peaceful, and really where I think the healing really happens. So, and that's where I can feel most connected, you know, to source, to her, and to my healing myself.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story,
Hmm.
Angela. Louise
Hmm.
Hay always says, um, the emotions have different seats in the body, and some of the physical stuff that came up for you, that kind of like Louise Hay hit the nail on the head with some of like the areas that those emotions were affecting you physically. And that's another thing that we see, not just, our own personal experiences, but with clients as well, is that these grievances and these traumas that we've experienced in our lives, like the issues are in the tissues, right? Like we hold on to them in so many ways within our body. I think that's why physical body work. Oh, we're really going down, we're really going down a bit of a
We
wormhole
went
with
down.
this
Yeah.
topic. But like that's why I like doing like deep yoga stretching of your hip area, releasing a lot of tension and grief from your body can bring tears, or body work, getting a massage. Like it's supposed to be this blissful, relaxing experience, but you come home and you find like you're in a mood. Like even Reiki, right? Like sometimes I'm doing distance Reiki with our clients and the next day they're feeling really emotional. It's like sometimes just that energy moving, a lot comes forth. And I love that, like the juicy healing, what the healing juice of the body, when you
Hmm.
mentioned
The
tears, Angela.
tears. Yeah.
Yeah, like letting
Like
them
juice for the
come and
heart.
know that's
Hmm.
energy moving and
Hmm.
just to embrace it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I talk a little bit about this on the podcast I just did on why the mindset doesn't always work, and just talking about somatic therapy. So if this is of interest to you, definitely suggest giving that a listen.
Such a great conversation. And so, whether it's trauma, the other thing that kind of popped up to me, and I mentioned it a little bit before, was the anxiety and the depression and the mood stuff, because I'm just coming back to the whole emotional state of us and how that ties into the HPA axis dysfunction, because those are chronic stressors. But then on the other end, where it's like a snake eating its tail, is that when you have imbalances with your hormones, stress hormones, sex hormones, thyroid hormones, it can lead to more depression, more anxiety. And I always say this is, but being in a heightened fight or flight state is designed to put you in an anxious state. You are looking for all the different solutions. What could go wrong? What am I going to have to deal with? But we get stuck living there.
Hmm.
But it keeps you heightened, right? And so it keeps that HPA axis kicked into high gear. Chronic stress can lead to chronic inflammation, chronic immune activation, and all of these things, all these wheels are turning, leading to more fatigue and more symptoms.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I love that, and one thing I want to just piggyback on that is just this idea that when the stress, it's like we often it relates to us not feeling safe in the world. And that's honestly what trauma often does, right? It doesn't make us feel safe. Even down to, right, of course, like the capital T traumas, you can understand that, right? Natural disasters and war and being abused, right? Like, of course, you're not going to feel safe in the world. And then all the way down to something like being bullying, where you no longer feel safe, right, to be who you are, or being made fun of. You no longer feel safe to be who you are, right? And how much like it's making me tingle right now, because it's like when we don't feel safe in the world, then stress is just chronic, right? Because almost everything we do and every thought we have is creating some sort of, chaos in the body, if you will, a little bit. And that's going to be spreading, right? That's not only just in our emotional mental world, right? It like you said, like we've been talking about, it ripples out into the physical body and affecting one system and then the other and then the other, right? So
Now I know we've kind of gone into this in a big way. So if it feels heavy, Angela, do you have any like how can we help people with this?
yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I do in the Fatigue to Fabulous program, right? And why we believe why our program is so successful is that we're not just throwing supplements at the problem, right? We are using healing modalities like emotional freedom technique and somatic therapy and yoga and meditation, really finding out what works for the person, because not one size fits all, right? And using this idea of this concept of the concept of neuroplasticity, that we can create new pathways in the brain, which thank goodness, into adulthood. So we know we can do that. It's science, and we can also change the nervous system, right? So we change the way that we think, we change the pathways, we change the way we think and what we believe, and then we can change also how our reaction, and we can regulate the nervous system. This is something that's not often addressed in these recovery programs. And it's really important for us to be able to work through these stresses or traumas in a really healthy way, and so we can start to feel safe in our bodies, safe in the world again. And I can't tell you how much that translates, right, to physical healing. So whether you work with us or someone else, I just really encourage you to also know that it doesn't have to be hard. Sometimes it can feel like Danielle said, kind of heavy. And what I've noticed though in doing this work for almost a decade now is that unraveling this stuff doesn't is honestly often not as hard as people think. They're like, oh, that's all I had to do, or that happened so quickly, Angela. Like I wasn't expecting to have that much of a breakthrough. Or Angela, I've been working, with a therapist for 10 years on this. And so I think if you're not having the progress that you'd hoped, if you've been working at something for years, decades, and not getting much progress, I just advise, you to really just listen to that inner voice. And if you need to find someone else, then I trust that will, when you start to kind of ask that question of like, what else is possible? What other support can I get? Then the universe will show you the way. So I'll leave you with that.
Thanks, Angela.
So we have one more. Okay. So it's a kind of a doozy, and we won't, let's just touch on the autoimmune conditions because it's so connected. And it kind of comes back to that again, that really strong theme here, an overreactive immune system.
So, in the autoimmune picture, this is where your immune system is overactive and mistakenly attacking the body's own healthy cells, tissues, and organs. And this inflammation and chronic immune response that's going on, again, ties in to disruption of the normal functioning of the HPA axis. So, a lot of people come to us with autoimmune conditions or other conditions or situations that we've addressed today, and then some. And they're wondering, because we're the Adrenal Recovery Collective, they're wondering like, well, I don't know if it's the adrenals. I think these other things are more of an issue for me. I don't think that the adrenals are what I need to focus on right now. And this is what we really wanted to share some clarity around today in regards to this topic, because the adrenals are always implicated and the foundations are always going to support you. Being able to calm your body, being able to reduce inflammation through the food that you eat, nourishing yourself, being able to address the gut issues and doing extra things in your lifestyle to support your gut. All of these foundations, exercise, movement, breath work, the things that lead to a healthy lifestyle and a healthy body, building those up in your day to day life and making them part of your regular are going to make you more robust, make you more physically resilient, make you more mentally resilient so that you can address these other factors, whether it's the ones we've listed here today or more. Cancer falls in this category, right? These chronic illnesses. Like we always want to be supporting the foundations and doing the best we can to just make sure that body, mind, and spirit is taken care of so we can bring our best version of ourselves in that situation forth to deal with whatever issues that we need to deal with.
Like at the root of all of this, it's like the foundations of like health in any condition, all of the things, it's like what we address in our program, right? It's like when you start addressing the foundations, it is going to help with so much, right? And you're going to see your symptoms start to lessen or go away because these are foundations that are like, I guess, the lowest common denominator of all of these conditions, right? When you start addressing the nervous system, the immune system, right? The inflammation, so much
100%. It's
can
like a
get better.
snowball. And we always say
Yeah.
that it's sometimes it starts out smaller, like that small little snowball. It's hard to get going. You're coming in really tired. We start doing the work and you start slowly, slowly. And then as these foundations get stronger and stronger and you start feeling better, your mood starts getting better. You start sleeping better. You're eating better. The snowball gets bigger and bigger and you start to see results more and more quickly. And it's catching more of those symptoms as we go. So sometimes it's hard to get that ball rolling, but once you do, so much is possible. So
Yeah.
this is what we wanted you to take away from this episode today. We know that some of these topics can feel really heavy. They can feel complex. We didn't even really touch onto some of the complexities of some of these topics. They all could have their own podcast and probably should at some point if we ever find the time. But whether it's these situations or something else, it could be an acute knee injury, right? But the foundations are going to support you. And there is so much possible for you. If you've only explored the mainstream medical route, if you haven't done any work with an integrative practitioner, you haven't done any of this holistic work, this would be an amazing time to step into that, especially if you've struggled for a while. We love people who are kind of coming to us from this realm because it's opening you up to just so much more that you likely haven't tapped into yet that could just change your life in a really impactful way. And that's what we want for you if you're
Yeah,
struggling.
and very quickly often. And
Yeah.
so, like you said, we've just touched kind of really broadly on all of these topics because they're huge. And so that's really where our doctors come in. And that's why we have chosen some of the most amazing integrative practitioners, functional medicine practitioners, naturopaths, who are experts in all of these areas, actually. So that's where they come in to really, for more complex cases, where we can bring them in for more support and more guidance and testing and so on. So hopefully, yeah, this started to connect some dots for you. Thank you so much for listening. And please consider giving our podcast a 5-star review if you like it. Helps other people find out about the podcast so they can get the information they need to start feeling good again and living their life to the fullest.
Thanks, Angela, for all your wisdom today.
Likewise, Danielle.